So, fun fact about Jared. Jared's going to all have us listen to what he puts his children to sleep in. So that is going to be his walkout music. So we'll all say hello to Jared.
So, as the title says here, we are going to see if we can build an R package with an LLM. They're all the rage right now. So we are going to first ask it to help us write some functions, just get the functions written. Then we are going to ask it to produce documentation. And then we're going to actually get help building the package. So first up, we will ask the question, the prompt, you are an experienced R programmer, write a function whose input is a path to a folder, and the output is a count of each of the different file types in the folder. Now, notice what it gave me. I didn't say to use base R. It just used base R. And it does camel case. It just did camel case. I didn't say it didn't know that I like camel case. It did it. The one thing I don't really like is that opening curly braces on the function definition line. I prefer it on its own line, but I could live with that. And it's really cool. It actually checks first that the path exists before it actually calls any code on it to get information. So there's a nice clean error to come out of there. If we call the function, we get back the results we expected. Notice it is the names above the results. That's because it is a named vector. That's very base R. But I asked, can you rebuild it with an argument that lets us specify which file types to consider? And it's really smart. It will actually first check to make sure I gave an argument, a value to the argument, because if I don't provide a value and it just looks for certain file types, there will be an error. So it's really smart. It's doing a lot of error capturing, or preventing errors, I should say. So that's really, really awesome that it's doing that. And I run the function both by itself to prove that the default case works, and I do it using an argument saying, just look at CSVs and JSONs, and it performed as expected. So far, so good. But now the question we've all been waiting for. Can you rewrite it to use the tidyverse? So I had to remove blank lines so it would fit on the slide, so just keep that in mind. But otherwise, the first thing I noticed is that it is both loading the packages like fs, and it's saying fs : dir ls. And it's kind of weird to do both. You do one or the other typically. But that's OK. And it's cool that instead of list.files, it's now using dir ls. So that's nice. It's using map, which is great. But notice it's using the old anonymous syntax. It's not using the new anonymous syntax. It's still using the old one. And it's still using the magrittr pipe, which maybe is good for backwards compatibility. But I like using the new pipe. But those are little details. And I love that it's giving comments. Now, the comments are saying what it's doing, not why it's doing it. But still amazing to get comments. I'm very happy. Using the function now, we get the same results. But it comes back as a tibble because it's tidy, which we expect. Then I give it the prompt. If you're going to use package : function, then you don't need to load the packages at the beginning. And it got rid of them. But notice very carefully, I just said package : function. I didn't say which ones to get rid of. I didn't say which packages, which functions. It just realized to get rid of all the library calls because it was already doing per : map, etc. And that's great. I didn't have to be very specific. I was very generic, in fact, and it figured out all the spots it needed it. And not only that, it gave me a couple of messages explaining why this is a good idea. It mentioned the conflicts and mentioned how it's more explicit. So that was a lot of good feedback from the LLM. But then I noticed something, that you are listing all the files when keeping the file names we want, if we specified any. I said, can you change it so that when listing files, we only search for the specified file types of any? So rather than searching for all the files and then reducing them, just search for fewer files to begin with. So first, it does a check here. And again, it only does it if I've specified an argument, which is a good safety check. But then it is mapping over each of the different file types and calling dir ls for each type of file. And it would be a lot better if it used a regex to do the search. It would be a lot cleaner. So I said instead of using per map, use a regex and feed that to glob pattern. And that would be better. And so it made the change, and that's good because, I'm more familiar with regex. Hold on, did I skip something here? Yeah, sorry. Nope, we're good. I said feed the regex to the blob. And then it gave me a note saying that using a regex instead of per is more elegant. Where did it learn that? Is that getting it from Stack Overflow saying there's a more elegant solution? Whatever it did, I'm very happy it came up with that result. But then when I ran the code, it didn't work. So I had to dig into the code, and maybe I should have been inspecting the code to make sure things were right. Or maybe what I should have done in hindsight is I should have told GPT, hey, this isn't working. Can you figure out why it's not working? I didn't try that. I wish I did. But I told it return 0 results. And I told it I think that the glob pattern is wrong, and that instead you should use the regex argument instead of the glob argument. So I told it to do 2 things. Fix the pattern, and I told it to switch the argument. And it did both of them. And it even explained why the regex was better, and it explained the regex itself, including why it had to use 2 backslashes to escape the period. It's great having a regex whisperer, because regex is tough, right? So now it works as specified. So great. So let's take another step farther. Can you write the roxygen documentation for this function? And it did it. I prefer when you actually explicitly say @title and @description, but this is more standard, so it did it. And it even used don't run, because it knows the examples won't work on cran. We all know how fun that is when your examples don't work on cran. They're very nice about it. It explained don't run. And that's great, because that's obscure. Not everyone knows don't run. So it's really great that it explained it in a note. I would have preferred that it wrapped the don't run inside a don't show, but hey, it's pretty great to begin with. So then I said, make a similar function that calculates the number of lines for each function. And notice that's a typo. I meant to say the number of lines of each file type, but I said function. And then I said, then return the number of lines, the average for each type of file, return NAs. You'll notice this prompt, I'm being much more explicit. I'm getting very detailed in what I want. But I really want people to focus on is that I told it to get a line count of the functions, but since I said files so many other times in the prompt, it realized that I misspoke and corrected for me. Or I mistyped, I should say. And that's really great that it realized my mistake. Now, it did give us roxygen automatically for this function. I left it out so it would fit on the slide. Now the function works. This gives us the average number of lines for each file type, whether you use the default case or whether you specify what files you want. So I'm really excited about this. Now I said, now write a function that uses this function to generate a bar plot of the average number of lines of each file type. So pretty cool, right? You'll see here that it uses ggplot by default. It just knows that's what I wanted because everyone uses ggplot. And it uses theme minimal, because I guess it knows the default plotting, no one likes it anymore. So it went straight for theme minimal. It's still doing package : function, even for ggplot, which is a little odd. And when I said use this function, it knew I meant the previous one, not the previous one. And again, it gave us roxygen, but I truncated it so it would fit. And here is our beautiful plot. Looks really gorgeous, right? It's actually well designed. Good color choices. I did have to print it. Sometimes with ggplot, you need to print it depending how it's designed. I didn't spend the time figuring that out. I could have. But then I asked for another step. I said, modify the function to allow users to choose either ggplot or echarts, and then make whichever version the user requests. So it uses an if statement to check, do you want ggplot? Here's ggplot. Do you want a echarts? It uses echarts. But notice here, there is no package called echartr. It doesn't exist. It used the wrong package name. So I had to correct it and said, it looks like you're trying to use echartr instead of echarts4r. So it actually apologized for its mistake. Yes. And then rewrote the function. Now the only problem is here, I had to know that echarts4r was the real function. Maybe I could have asked it, hey, that doesn't exist, what's the right name? Maybe you could have figured it out, but I gave it the right function name. And now I could set plot library to echarts4r, and this is an interactive plot now. You could hover over it and double click it and do all that cool stuff. So it's really, really nice. But I don't like the if statement. I don't like that it's using the if statement to switch back and forth. So I said, instead of checking which plot libraries with an if statement, make the default argument a vector of possible values, then check with match.arg. And it did that. You'll see that it uses match.arg to figure out which of the available choices it used, but it still used the if statement. It didn't actually change the if statement. It just used match.arg to figure out what the user input. So I'll come back to that later. I'll fix that later. Then I said, you know what? Instead of putting all of the code in the body of the function, break out the ggplot code and the echarts code in their own functions, then have a wrapper function to call them. And it told me this is great for making the code more modular. And that's nice to get the feedback. So you can see here, Before we saw the individual functions, this is the wrapper function that does it. And it still figures out how to do it with an if statement. And it's using match.arg, but it's still using an if statement. So I gave it a very unhelpful prompt. I said, almost got it, but use match.arg here too. Now, even though it was using match.arg, it realized I meant get rid of the if statement. And you see it got rid of the if statement. It made a list of, it actually made a list of plots. It generated each of the 2 plots and made a list of those options. And then with match.arg, it figured out which plot I wanted and subsetted the list to give me back the plot. It's a little not awesome. It's not quite an error, but it's not great, and we'll fix it in a little bit. But first I said, add options for base R and lattice. Because I know that Jeff Ryan loves base R, and I know that David Robinson hates lattice. So I put it in there, and it put them both in there, and it actually created new functions, and it realized this. It realized that we already had this general function and then individual functions for the different libraries, and it did that for me. Now, when I make a base plot, it prints out some numbers, and I didn't bother looking into why. I probably could figure that out, but I didn't bother. But look how much this still looks like the ggplot. It looks almost as attractive. So you could actually do amazing stuff with base plot. It's just a lot harder, and I wouldn't want to write it myself. Likewise, I wouldn't want to write lattice code. But it wrote lattice code for me, and that's awesome. Except notice here. Notice there's 2 being printed on the slide? That felt wrong to me. So I told ChatGPT, it looks like you're printing both. And I realized, and again, I had to notice this, is that, remember the list was generating the plots in a list and then subsetting it? So instead, it is now storing a named list using the functions as objects in the list. And then it will subset the list of functions to get one function based on the match.arg, and then call that with parentheses around your object. And that's great. This is like a great example of good R programming. I love this function now. And here is the fixed lattice plot. Everything works, we're happy. So now I say, I want to turn these functions into a package. Can you outline the steps? The reason you do that is because oftentimes it's great to have ChatGPT tell you what steps you need to do, and then feed those steps back into ChatGPT later. And it told me to install DevTools, use DevTools create, copy the functions, document them, build, install, other things. But first I said, can you help me come up with a name for the package? It came up with 5 options and gave the reasons for the options. None were super awesome, but they're all camel case, so I'm happy, so I went with it. And I said, let's use file type analyzer. And it told me it's a great choice. It's like a nice affirmation. And it wished me luck. It's really sweet. So then I said, can you help me fill out the description field? And it gave me this nice description. And it came up with more than that. It gave me actually more in the whole description file. And this is the entire description file. And it listed all the packages we need, or so I thought. And it listed a few extra packages as well that I don't need. It got a little confused. So then I said, let's use the MIT license, and it gave me a new description file, and it gave me the MIT license file, and it told me to change the year and the name for the file. So that's helpful. But notice this. Don't mind the typo where I misspelled license, but ChatGPT was unfazed. So that's pretty great. Here's that license file where it told me to change the name and everything. But then I went too vague. I said, can you write tests for each of the functions included in the package? And it told me how important it is. In hindsight, what I would have done is I would have taken one function one at a time, gave the function back to the prompt, and said, please write a test for this. Because it got confused. Notice now it's using snake case instead of camel case for both the function name and the argument names. And the function name is wrong. Who knows if the test is testing properly? Likewise, for my second function, again, the names are snake case instead of camel case. And it's searching this directory, which it's supposed to do, but that directory doesn't necessarily exist. Then for the plotting test, all it did, and explained the problem, it just tested them to make sure it didn't give an error. It would have been nice if it at least tested for the class of the object coming back. You can test, is this a ggplot? Is this a lattice? Maybe you can't do that for base R, but you can do it for eCharts 4R. So it would have been nice if it came back with a test for classes. But not bad. It gave me a lot of stuff. It gave me, I forgot about expect silent, it reminded me. But then it also told me that I should use from the test that package, set up and tear down in order to build that test directory and set that up for me. I'm like, awesome. can you show me how to use that? How would I use it? And it built out how to set up, like, hey, create temporary files, then use your code, test the code, then delete the files. It did all that. And it did a pretty decent job explaining it. Except that setup and teardown have been superseded. It can't keep up with the changes in the tidyverse. But not bad. I asked it to populate data into the test files. It just created blank files. I asked it to populate data. And when it did that, it made all the files TXT files, when before it was giving me TXT and CSV and JSON. So it's getting a little confused at this point because it's forgotten everything that came earlier. You also notice the test isn't awesome. We know, well, I know at this point the function returns a tibble, but it's checking for a data frame. And also I happen to discover in the tibble, a column was like a named vector inside the column. So like it should have been using expect equivalent instead of expect equal. And the test, out of everything I was doing, that was like the most wrong part. But it's probably because it came last. I didn't refeed it information. Then I asked it a question like, do I do setup and tear down once for the entire package? Or do I do it for each of the individual test files? And it told me for the individual test files. All right, so things are OK. Then I said, for the plotting functions, can you use a visual differ? And I only knew to ask this because I used this before. If you didn't know a visual differ existed, you wouldn't know what to do here. But I asked for it, and it used vdiffr. Now, of course, it's still using the wrong function names, and it's actually, at this point, not only using the wrong function names, it's calling it incorrectly. It's passing it a data frame instead of a path. But, you know, it's my fault. I should have fed it the tests. I'm taking the blame for the machine now. So Stockholm Syndrome. But after I highly modified the test, and I made a lot of changes, all the tests pass, including the visual differs. So that's really awesome. Then I did a full CRAN check. I said, let's check it. And this is where things start going even more sideways. I get a bunch of notes about non-visible bindings, which everyone loves dealing with that. It forgot to import the tibble package. And it didn't export the migrator pipe or import the migrator package. And it imported packages we didn't need. So I had to manually fix all of that, both in the description file and in the roxygen files. I fixed it. I did some help work to fix it out. So now it's ready to publish. So I asked it to draft a tweet to announce the package. It even used an emoji. It knows how much the R community loves it. And it suggested that I use a hex sticker, because it knows that the R community loves hex stickers, right? So how am I going to make the hex sticker? Well, now I turn to Dolly, and I say, a calculator superimposed over a stack of papers in the style of Andy Warhol. Not bad, right? It came out like this. And the trick I learned, the first few times I prompted it, I asked for a hex sticker of a calculator superimposed over a stack of paper. It just went horribly. I realized, OK, just get a rectangular image, and then I can crop it. OK, but how do I crop it? How do I convert this image into a hex sticker? And it told me to use the hex sticker package. Now, I had to change some of the settings from the default that ChatGPT suggested, but still, it suggested all these settings, like the different values, but it got me there. And it looks like this. Yes, I know the package name looks terrible. That's human error, right? I could have made that nicer. I could have chose a different, instead of green, I could have chose something else. But it's great. So all you have to do now is send this image to Sticker Mule, and they'll send you back your hex stickers. And they cut it out for you. It's great. So I'm very happy with this. So what do we learn through all of that stuff right now? Well, the LLM can write decent functions quickly. They're not great functions, but they're good and they're fast. It made a bunch of mistakes that I needed to catch. But that's OK, because I make mistakes that I need to catch. So we all deal with that. It definitely needs guidance on style, like stick to snake case or stick to camel case. Use package : function. And it needs directions on less often used tools like vdiffr. You know, I even rarely use that. So it needs a little bit of direction on these tools. And it gets confused as you go further along. So that's why, remember I actually mentioned you need to ask for the steps, then give it back the steps? You need to actually give it back the stuff as you go to remind it, which happens with humans too. And it needs a human checking the work. Or you need to at least tell it to check itself. So, you know, this isn't something that can go alone right now. You need some help. And if you want to use the package, it's on GitHub. I haven't put it on Crayon because it's honestly not that useful, but it's up there. Now, I did need to make a lot of modifications. I needed to fix some things, but it's working. It's up there. It passes the test. It passes the checks. It's up there. And if you want to get a transcription of the chat that I had at ChatGPT, you can go to this link. The slides will be available, and you can click that and see my entire chat and everything it did. So that's a really fun way to, it's really great. You can go and see what's going on. So thank you very much.